The 2022 NFL draft class is 2 years into their NFL careers, and for a short time period in late April, it's hugs and kisses all around. But shortly after, it's time to get to work, and it's time to live up to the expectations of being an NFL draft pick. But not every player that's drafted, whether it's in the first round or the 7th round, becomes a good draft pick for the franchise that selected them. We often hear leading up to the draft that in 3 years we will find out how this class fared and who are the true draft day winners and losers were. But you don't always need 3 years to be able to determine winners and losers from a draft. And we are 2 years into the 2022 NFL draft class's careers, and you can see the Jets are big winners coming out of that class as they selected guys like Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, and Breece Hall. But not every class from 2022 was as successful as the Jets draft class was, not even close, and there's several teams that wish they selected a player even close to what the Jets did that year. And in today's video, we're going to discuss a few of the worst team drafts from the 2022 class. Now let's begin. We are starting today's video by discussing the 2022 Panthers class. The Panthers had 6 picks from this draft and only 3 are still on the roster 2 years later. To at least be somewhat fair here for one of the picks, they drafted a corner at pick 242 in Kalen Barnes, and the likelihood a mid to late 7th round pick is on the team that drafted them 2 years later is, well, low. But for the rest of the class, it's been tough. Their first pick was at number 6 overall on left tackle Ikem Ekwonu out of North Carolina State. Now, if you followed the channel for a bit, then you know I was pretty high on Ikem entering 2023, and I thought he could have been a breakout player, and in fact, I made a video last year with him on the thumbnail discussing breakout players entering the 2023 season. But there were times during the 23 season where Ikem looked bad. Not a rep or two that was bad followed by 19 or 20 good reps with the occasional bad rep, but there were times where he looked flat out bad. The 2023 Panthers season is a season best forgotten for everyone, but I thought Icky improved as a run blocker from year 1 to year 2, and I do think he will improve again in year 3. When he was coming out of NC State, he was a really good run-blocking tackle that needed some work as a pass protector, and it reared its ugly head this past year. But what I think needs to be remembered about Ekwonu's 2023 season specifically is, in a lot of ways, he and Bryce Young too, for that matter, were set up to fail. They lost 9 games by 2 scores last year and obviously lost 15 total games, but when you're playing from behind as much as they were, there's no secret as to what you're doing or what you're going to be trying to do when you're down 17 points in the 4th quarter. Speaking strictly from a game flow standpoint, an offensive tackle that's team is more competitive is going to look better in pass protection more often than not because the defense has to react to what the offense is doing. They don't have to react when they're up by 2 or 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter and can pin their ears back to get after the quarterback. Yes, Ikem struggled, but I do believe in him moving forward. Now, we spent a lot of time on Ikem specifically because he was their only player taken in the first 2 rounds. The Panthers' 2nd and 4th round picks in 22 were traded for quarterback Sam Darnold in April of 21, so that's where their 2nd round pick went that year. Their 3rd round pick was spent on Matt Corral, and he suffered a season-ending injury in a preseason game against the Patriots. He was waived a year later and is now a member of the Birmingham Stallions of the United Football League. Pass rusher Amari Barno, who has 2 career sacks, and interior offensive lineman Cade Mays, who was not good when he played, are the other 2 picks that are still on the roster. This draft class at this point is reliant on Ikem Ekwonu developing into a franchise tackle, and if he doesn't, then they whiffed from start to finish. I still believe in Ekwonu, and he will always have a role in the NFL, especially if he were to kick inside to guard, but there's a reason the Panthers have been so bad over the past few years, and despite what the media may say, it's more than just Bryce Young not being 6'4" and 230 pounds and having prototypical NFL size. This truly was an awful draft class, with the exception of maybe 1 pick. Next up is the New England Patriots draft, and it started with the selection of Chattanooga guard Cole Strange in the 1st round. When this pick was made, there were a lot of, wait, who? And, oh my god, are you serious? And, wow. And every reaction like this because of, well, how strange of a pick this was. Sean McVay would go on to say that Strange was a player they were in fact targeting in the 3rd round, as this was in the middle of the F them picks era, as the Rams' first selection wasn't until pick 104 at the very end of the 3rd round. And I went back and found a 7-round mock draft from Chad Reuter of NFL.com, and he actually mocked Strange to the Rams at pick 104. But the reality is, if the Patriots hit on this pick and Strange was a stud from day one, nobody would care and everybody would go back to the drawing boards and wonder what they got wrong in the pre-draft process and how they can get better as an analyst, or from a team and front office perspective, of how they can get better in the future. But he hasn't been good, and he was already a 24-year-old rookie, so it's not like he was a 21-year-old developmental guard that could get stronger and physically develop over the first few years of his career. I simply don't think Cole Strange is a good football player, at least not at the NFL level. But first-round whiffs happen, and every franchise has them, period. But it didn't stop there for New England. We've run in depth about the Tyquan Thornton pick before, and I'm not going to continue to beat a dead horse with that selection, aside from mentioning George Pickens was available and that Dane Brugler, now of The Athletic, wrote a 7-round mock draft a few weeks before the draft and had him going at pick 156, which was over 100 spots after New England took him in the top 50. They had terrible value with the first 2 picks, and their best pick from this draft was corner Marcus Jones in the 3rd round at 85 overall. Marcus is a 5'9", 190-pound corner, so obviously there were size limitations there, and through 2 years, Marcus is best known for a walk-off punt return touchdown over the Jets, in which New England won with a score of 10-3. Their first of 3 4th-round picks was corner Jack Jones, who missed curfew before the Week 9 game against the Commanders in 23 and was waived a few weeks later and is now a Raider. Their second of 3 4th-round picks was running back Pierre Strong, who was traded in August of 23 to the Browns in exchange for backup offensive tackle Tyrone Wheatley Jr., and their 3rd 4th-round pick was quarterback Bailey Zappi, who is, well, not good. They had 4 other draft picks past the 180 mark, and those picks went, as you can imagine, most picks past the 180 mark do, and there was a reason the Patriots were selecting in the top 3 of the 2024 NFL Draft. Not every pick past the 180 mark works out like a certain selection did back in 2000. They had bad value with their first 2 picks, and the best play a player from their 2022 class has made was a walk-off punt return touchdown in a season where they had a losing record and missed the playoffs. To make matters worse, this was also after trading back from pick 21 with Kansas City, who would go on to select All-Pro corner Trent McDuffie. McDuffie in the Patriots defense would have been a very good fit, as he would be an upgrade to really any defense across the league, but it really makes matters worse when you overdraft a player from everyone's perspective and whiff on nearly every pick after that. The hope at this point is Strange can pull it together in year 3, and that Marcus Jones, after missing most of 2023, can play at a serviceable level moving forward. Now, from New England to Minnesota, we go to discuss an all-time disastrous draft class, and it started when they were on the clock at pick 12. The Vikings traded their first and second round picks to Detroit, which were picks 12 and 46, and in return received picks 32, 34, and 66. Now, not every trade is the same, but for reference, if you go by the old draft value chart made way back in the day, Minnesota would have needed another late 2 or early 3 to make this even. And at pick 32, Minnesota drafted an all-time draft bust in Lewis Cine, and to date, Lewis has played 10 career defensive snaps and has a singular tackle lifetime. Now, what was particularly unfortunate for Lewis Cine was he suffered a compound fracture in his lower left leg during the 2022 season and early in the year, as it was in week 4 against the Saints. If you are not aware of what a compound fracture is, the most notable or memorable one in sports was probably the Kevin Ware injury about 10 years ago, and if you are interested in going to go back and look at Lewis Cine injury when it happened, it was on a special teams play. I would say viewer discretion is advised, and I will leave it at that. Now, there are some Vikings fans, not all, but some, that think because Lewis suffered such a catastrophic injury early in his career, only 4 games in, that he was kind of doomed from there, while others think it's been well over a year and really almost 2 years since that injury, that if he were ever going to be something in the NFL, we would know by now, and that he would have more than a single tackle in 2 years, and that he would have played more than 10 total snaps in 2 full seasons. Obviously, a first-round pick doesn't define your entire draft class, but it didn't get better from there for Minnesota. They traded back with the Packers in the early part of the second round, so Minnesota traded with not 1 but 2 division rivals in the first 40 picks of the draft, which allowed the Lions to get Jameson Williams and the Packers to get Christian Watson. Sure, it could have worked out worse for the Vikings, but the point is you willingly helped a division rival and didn't exactly fleece them on top of it. Now, in the second round, the Vikings drafted corner Andrew Booth, and Andrew Booth, and Lewis Cine for that matter too, might not make the roster in 2024. Technically, Andrew Booth has started 2 career games, and I'm going to be honest, as a Vikings fan, I don't remember which games he started. It's been that rough of a first few years for him, but wait, it gets worse. But wait, there's more, rather. Ed Ingram has started a lot of games for the Vikings over the past 2 years, but he has been a complete disaster. There were multiple times where he stepped on Kirk Cousins' foot after the ball was snapped, and there were multiple times where he had tripping penalties and let guys get by him, and he has not been a good player. Now, corner Caleb Evans was their 4th round pick, and there was a play specifically this past year against the Chargers, which will be on the screen, where Caleb had the ball right here in his hands, and the play somehow ended in a touchdown for the Chargers, and that kind of shows the first few years he's had. Linebacker Brian Asamoah was a 3rd round pick, and he's been a special teams player at best, and you get the kind of class that this was for the Minnesota Vikings. The best pick, and really this is all based on potential at this point, is running back Ty Chandler that was taken on day 3, but as you probably remember, the Vikings signed Aaron Jones in free agency this year, so while Chandler had a 100-plus yard game down the stretch of the 23 season, that's been the most production from this entire draft class for the Vikings over the past 2 years, aside from the 25-plus games Ed Ingram has started, and in the 25-plus games Ed Ingram has not played good on top of it. So it was a very, very bad first draft class for GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I do think the Denver Broncos should be mentioned because their first round pick in 2022 is Russell Wilson, and they're still paying the price from that trade. They released Russell Wilson this past offseason and are eating one hell of a cap hit to this day because the player they thought they were getting and the player they received completely wrecked their franchise for a few years. Former head coach Nathaniel Hackett obviously didn't play a good part within this either. Now, I like Nick Bonito coming out of Oklahoma in 2022, and he is coming off of an 8-sack season in 2023. But it is worth noting that Bonito had 4.5 sacks of his 8 last year in a 2-game span against 2 poor offensive lines in Chicago and the Jets. Bonito had just 2.5 sacks in the final 10 games of the 23 season. They also drafted Greg Dulcich in the 3rd round, who led all rookie tight ends in receiving yards back in 2022, but had a lingering hamstring injury for most of the 23 season. We, of course, wish Greg the best moving forward, but aside from those two and DB Damari Mathis, this class really didn't have any contributors. I still have hope for Dulcich, but I definitely think Denver deserved a mention. Arizona too, for that matter, as they traded a first-round pick to the surprise of everyone for receiver Hollywood Brown, who is no longer on the roster. I thought for sure they would pay him this offseason to keep him around for at least one more year for what was essentially a first-round pick to keep him on the roster, but the new regime obviously let him walk, and he is now a Chief. I'm sure some Colts fans were frustrated with the production of Alec Pierce, Jelani Woods, and Nick Cross as top 100 picks through 2 years, but I think they drafted a legit franchise tackle in Bernhard Raimann. There were a few classes that could have been considered, but like the Colts, for example, a lot of teams had one really good contributor that kept them from being amongst the worst classes. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 40% of people watching are subscribed, and it makes a big difference. Also, if you enjoy this content, you will love the Football Analysis Podcast, which the link is in the bio, and I will see you guys next time. Until then, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.